Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tabor Talk. So, getting right into this, Joe Rogan, the MAGA midget, is spewing classic white nationalist rhetoric. I'm going to show you a clip. Actually, this is from the David Pakman show. I mean, I cannot believe this guy. Now, let me say this. I don't believe Joe Rogan is a racist. People who follow me, who watch this channel, know that I started this. I used to do a kind of a Joe Rogan review. I used to listen to every one of his podcasts in its entirety, not just clips, the whole 3, sometimes 4 hour podcast or whatever. And I used to do kind of a review and a critique. And I used to love the guy. I mean, Joe Rogan is a completely different human being now. That podcast, look, from 6 7 years ago, 10 years, like nothing like it. I mean, Joe Rogan was basically a liberal, a center left guy, and the podcast used to be intellectually stimulating. He had scientists on and politicians, yeah, from both sides, left, right. You have a lefty on, someone from on the left, and then someone on the right, and he was fair. And what I liked about him was he was very curious, a curious guy, and the whole thing was perfect. His name was Joe Rogan, like your average Joe, but kind of smarter than the average bear. Just curious, asking questions, what the average person would want to, without all the rhetoric and all that, like jargon, I should say, like intellectual jargon. And it was good. I loved it. I mean, and to see Rogan go from this, like, he is such a fucking idiot. The guy is so gross now. And I'll say this, I don't believe he's racist. He's just a dumb fuck. Oops, my dog. Now watch this.
Oops, just dropped a classic white nationalist talking point without even realizing it. At least I'm going to assume he doesn't realize it. On a recent episode of his podcast, Joe Rogan talked about how when China wants to stay Chinese, nobody has a problem with it. But when Poland wants to stay white, all of a sudden, people aren't so happy. I know. Listen to this.
A thing when an all-white country wants to stay all-white, where people get very nervous of. If you have, let's say China. Like, China is Chinese people. We all agree that it's filled primarily with Chinese people. There's people that live there from all walks of life, all over the world, but it's mostly Chinese people. If China had decided that they wanted to remain Chinese and stay Chinese, and that being Chinese is very important to what China is, no one would have a problem with that.
Yeah.
When a country like Poland does it, you're like, oh, those white people, they want to keep everybody out. They want it to be all white.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and
because that's post-World War II. That's post-Aryan race talk. That's post-Nazi stuff. That's what people are legitimately freaked out about. That's the most recent stain in our history where we look back and say, wow, that was close.
Listen, on the surface, this might sound like a simple observation about double standards. When China wants to stay Chinese, it's fine. When Poland wants to stay white, it's bad. But the reality is that this is an old rhetorical trick that's been used in white nationalist and white supremacist circles for decades. Now, I'm not saying Rogan's deliberately repeating that. I would love to talk to him about it. But Rogan's entire premise here is based on a complete and total misunderstanding or representation of China and of Poland. China is Chinese, and when it wants to stay Chinese, no one has a problem, Rogan says. But when Poland wants to stay white, everybody gets upset. Now, here's the reality. China has 56 ethnic groups and more than 300 languages and dialects. It might all seem like Chinese to Rogan, one people, one language, but it's not. And the idea that China wants to stay Chinese is misleading because China is extraordinarily multi-ethnic. Now, when white nationalists argue that places like Poland or any other European country should remain white, what they're really advocating for is racial purity. this is a core tenet of white nationalism. They frame any level of immigration or diversity as a threat to whiteness, even when the demographics shift by really small percentages. That's not the case in China, but that's what they're fighting against in Poland. Now, notice how Rogan says Poland wants to remain white. And the word remain is a key thing here, because the argument being pushed, whether Rogan intends it or not, is that Poland has some kind of pure, homogenous white identity that must be preserved. This is the same language used by white nationalist groups who talk about the so-called Great Replacement, which is that white people are being systematically replaced in Western countries. In the U.S., it's Democrats are bringing in brown and black people illegally to somehow become citizens, even though there's no way, and eventually vote in elections. These are versions of the white replacement theory, the Great Replacement theory. The idea that European nations must remain white echoes the talking points of groups like Identity Europa, the American Renaissance movement, people like Richard Spencer. White nationalist movements have always justified their racial purity by pointing to countries like China or Japan, and it is playbook stuff. And what it ignores is that, number one, these countries aren't as racially pure as the white nationalists claim. Number two, the argument is really designed as a way to launder white nationalism into mainstream conversation by saying it's just fair. If China gets to stay Chinese, Poland should get to stay white. And it is the same logic that segregationists used in the United States during the civil rights era. Other cultures, they get to preserve their traditions. We just want to preserve ours. This is the same logic that South African apartheid supporters would use to justify racial separation. So what Rogan's statement does is it fits into the broader kind of grievance politics of white nationalism. White people, especially in the West, are oppressed because they just want to maintain their culture. Now, of course, nobody is saying Poland can't preserve its traditions. What's actually happening is that these arguments are being used to push obviously anti-immigration, obviously anti-multiculturalism, but often just outright racist policies under the guise of protecting whiteness.
Of course, that's what
Rogan is playing with fire here.
And
I don't know whether he realizes
what a piece of
Rogan
shit he
is amplifying
man.
an
MAGA
argument
midget,
that's been used to justify everything from just banning immigration to outright violence on the basis of race. Do you think he realizes that this is what he's toying with, or does he have no idea? Let me know.
I mean, unfucking believable. That guy is so gross. I mean, I haven't watched his podcast in like years. I mean, and I gave him a long leash. I was like, all right, you know, but he's full blown MAGA. He's a disgusting person. He's an idiot. And see, I was wrong about him. I thought he was a good guy. I was completely wrong. So you could be wrong. I thought Rogan was a great guy. He's a piece of shit. He's a piece of garbage, and he's a dumb fuck. All right, on that note, good friends, good books, and a sleepy conscience. That's a quote from Mark Twain. And I always end with, hey, how about Elvis Costello says, peace, love, and understanding. What's so, you know the song, what's so bad about peace, love, and understanding? People have asked me about that. That's what that is. All right, more to come, Tabor Talk. Okay, and if you made it this far, thank you very much. Make sure you like and subscribe. It helps with the algorithm. Peace, everyone.